So this presentation is a result of a interaction on Facebook, and someone named Marie posted a picture, and the top of the picture, it's a picture of an iceberg, and then it's labeled. The iceberg is set up as an analogy. The top of the iceberg is what is easily visible. That would be behaviors, and then capacities or skills, abilities. Those are what's listed at the top of the iceberg above the surface where it's easily visible. That picture then lists several things below the surface of the water, hidden under the water. So the much bigger part of the iceberg includes, in that picture, convictions, beliefs, values, and identity. I would add, not only does self-image or identity fit in that list, but also persona. And what I want to add to that image is all of these things that are presented as below the surface, even unconscious or internal. I disagree with the labeling of them as unconscious. It's not like we're not talking about genetics or something, the nervous system or the digestive system or, female or male chromosomes and genetic codes. All of these things we're talking about as far as convictions and beliefs and values and identity and even persona and self-image, those are created through language. Those are even patterns of the use of language. So when someone states that they have a certain value, that they, that of all the different values that are possible in a society, they've picked up on certain things that they really value. They've learned some hard lessons about honesty, so they value honesty or trust or whatever they call it. So different people value different things, of course, at different times, and some of it's just based on their personal experiences. But there are also social values that are basically imposed or programmed or publicized to very large numbers of people. So all at once, people value a particular thing. And oddly enough, the example that comes to mind is diamond rings. So people are told that diamond rings or gold or silver or whatever are really, really valuable. And or real estate or, whatever. If everyone believes that something is very valuable, then they act as if it's valuable, and they will pay a lot of money for it, and they won't sell it for a small amount. So you can have that with real estate, with the diamond ring, whatever. There's these evaluations or valuations, appraisals that people will make and believe and then act on. Those are very explicit and measurable things. I want to back off of that particular reference to just identity, convictions, beliefs, and persona, or how I'm different from other people, how I present myself as unusual or different to others. Now, I do that through speaking. Anyone who presents themselves as, introduce yourself. Let's tell us a little bit about you. Well, they'll speak. They're probably not going to juggle. They're probably not going to show some skill. They're probably going to talk. And they may mention some skills and, personal history and whatever they say. But if they belong to certain groups, they may say so. So how does let's start with the issue of convictions. So convictions are statements that I accept, right? Even that I defend. So I can have a denial of something is not blah, 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 or something should not be blah, blah, blah. We could call that denial. And then we could have affirmations or positive assertions. Cholesterol is poisonous. That would be a, from a linguistic, grammatical perspective, that's a positive assertion. So, imperative, I think, is the word that a grammar person would use. It's it is a declaration. It's declarative tense or whatever. Boom. Cholesterol is poisonous, or cholesterol is wonderful, or cholesterol is disgusting, or whatever it is. Those are all declarations. So the idea of this presentation is to explore how language can be conscious, and how people may talk about identity and convictions as if they're unconscious. They're just unexamined. They're actually consciously constructed through language, and then we may forget that we consciously construct them through language. We may ongoingly construct them. I don't just have a conviction, I keep making a conviction. If we think of conviction as a kind of a statement or an affirmation or a denial that someone socially displays, then I don't just have convictions, I do them. I present them. Beliefs and values. If I don't act on my values, that's unusual. Now there are occasions where someone will make a social display or a statement of having a certain value that really is inconsistent with their activities, their what they do. But when they present that pretense or that persona or that mask, that's one, it's happening in language, and it's also predictable. This happens quite a lot, that people will be more consciously focused on what they say to each other than what they actually do. People actually think that they're kind or honest or whatever. If they're really identified as being a kind and honest person, they sincerely filter out their own behaviors because perception involves language. Once you go beyond a developmental level neurologically of an infant, and once we learn language, then perception and interpretation, those are all involving language. Language is, labeling things. So, I guess I can, I had meant to read what I had written to Marie here publicly on Facebook here, or at least in a thread that lots of people, dozens of people would be able to see. So I make reference to effects. So when I construct something in language, I construct a statement, then that can be an effect, a created thing. So language is the method or tool, and then out of that is constructed a conviction or an identity, or a belief, or a prejudice, or whatever. The anti-hatred, the anti, I like the anti-hatred. Those are good. We're justified in hating those people because they're haters. They're hateful. They're, whatever justifies hatred. So everybody, different groups will have their different standards for what justifies hatred and animosity towards others. Oh, those other people are hateful, so that justifies us being hateful toward them because they're hateful in a particular way that they shouldn't be. They're hateful about the thing that they shouldn't be hateful about, according to us. Now, those people have their own standards of preference or hatred or whatever, and those standards all involve language. Anyway, so we have all these different effects that can be constructed through language, different convictions, different values, different beliefs, different identities, different personas. So why does an infant have no convictions and no identity? I already answered this. Because they've not developed language. And those effects of convictions and identity and so on are created through language. Further, there's nothing especially unconscious about language. So this is really the main point of why I made this presentation, is in the picture that Marie shared, it indicates that identity and beliefs are unconscious or can be unconscious. And I don't entirely disagree with that. I get the value of that model, that presentation, those assertions. But I'm presenting another issue here, that we can be entirely conscious of all of these effects of language, because we can be conscious of language. So why does an infant have no convictions or no identity yet? Because they've not developed language, and those effects of convictions, identity, and so on are created through language. Further, there's nothing especially unconscious about language. People may use the linguistic concept or the linguistic category of unconscious to defend or excuse their identity. Like, oh, it's just my identity. I have no choice about it because it's unconscious. Or that person, say somebody commits a murder or, drives drunk or whatever. Well, we excuse them because they're a minor. They're under 18. Oh, okay. Oh, that changes everything. Or something, or nothing. Because since they're young, they're probably just unconscious. Okay. Or since they're mentally challenged, since they're developmentally disabled, we'll give them, we're going to give them a different set of standards to pass the third grade because whatever. So how conscious somebody is can be set up as an excuse. So the reason that medical doctors have gone through this long, the fact is that medical doctors have gone through this long period of training, so that's why I think that their statements have more authority than someone else, because they've been through a lot of training and programming and indoctrination. So they've been through more indoctrination than me. So I'm going to defer to whatever doctrines the doctors present. So that's one idea that someone could have. Basically, if somebody gets challenged on an issue, that's just the way I am. That's a good example of what I was talking about here to Marie. Someone will make a statement of, well, that's just who I am. That's just how I am. If you don't like it, well, wait. How I am is just some habits of language. When people talk about, well, that's just how I am. I'm an honest and direct person, and I don't filter, and I just say whatever I think, and that's good, and I'm not going to change because that's how I am. Of course they vary their behavior depending on their social circumstance. They're just, they're making an excuse about a particular case or a set of cases to say, well, in those cases, the bottom line is they don't care enough to filter themselves. There are people with Tourette's syndrome or whatever who might use curse words, and really, there are different levels of ability to filter. But to say in general, for an adult to say, well, that's just the way I am, that developed over time. That was not how they were when they were an infant. I wasn't somebody who, I think to say an example here. So in the school library, I don't just burst out whatever I say because I know it's a library. So or during a funeral or whatever, anybody will learn to filter what they say. if they're at a movie theater or whatever, they eventually probably learn not to be as loud and talk to the TV like they do at home. They don't talk to the screen like they do at home. If they talk to the screen at home, okay. But in a movie theater, eventually people pick up, okay, there's a lot of people here. It's not normal for us to talk to the screen. We just be quiet. At least in some, some groups, it would be normal to be quiet during a movie, relatively quiet. So we present excuses that, oh, that's just how I am, and it's unconscious. Well, that's just my, conviction. I've been an MD for decades, and I was indoctrinated about certain ideas, and it's just unconscious. That's not an excuse. That might be an explanation of how, somebody, first got to the point of having a particular conviction or belief or prejudice or presumption or whatever. Yeah, sure, they were indoctrinated and they've used it for a long time. Fine. They've never been challenged. They've never scientifically, assessed something personally. I never really, researched it as far as other people's scientific tests and trials and so on. It's possible that because it's so popular and so familiar, and because so many people have been exposed to that idea, it's so it's so familiar. That's an excuse. It's just unconscious. Well, I don't know if that's an accurate labeling. So there are different levels of alertness and different levels of trance or presumptiveness. In the indoctrination rituals of a typical science classroom, students may be programmed with unexamined doctrines and dogmas about a particular group of chemical compounds. So let me back up to say unexamined doctrines and dogmas by the students and by the instructors and the janitors and everybody in the school system, the superintendents. Nobody is examining these ideas prior to their being used in the classroom, as far as nobody involved with the presentation of those ideas to the students. Nobody directly involved. There's somebody in a curriculum selection committee, and there are lobbyists, and there are politicians, and there are Department of Education panels and committees and blah, blah, blah. Yes, there are people who intentionally construct those curriculums, of course, who write the textbooks and publish and edit and filter out what information and organize the information. Yes. But the instructors and the administrators and the students, they don't examine these doctrines and ideas generally. The instructor is, said, your job is to, without examining these ideas, present them to the students and test them on their memorization and repetition of these unexamined ideas. So that's what the students do in general, because the instructor rewards them with good grades and social validation and social proof and all that. The instructor rewards them for blindly memorizing and repeating the doctrine, such as the doctrine that cholesterol is dangerous or even poisonous. It's not generally part of the classroom process to examine that idea, to question that idea. There's no science. There's no scientific inquiry, no scientific method in the vast majority of science presentations. It's just, we're the authority on science, and here's the scientific premise or doctrine, theory, whatever it's presented as. Fact. Here's the scientific fact. There's no questioning of it, in this classroom at least. And so the students are presented that idea, they memorize the idea, they repeat it on the test, they're rewarded for that conformity, for that blind faith. So if 10 years later, after the student was in the classroom, 10 years pass, and then someone asks those students, those now graduates, whether it is true or false that cholesterol can kill someone, then the individuals who are most ignorant of science may insist that the correct answer is true. Cholesterol can kill someone. And they may insist it. They may not just say, I believe it, I think that's true. They may have a tremendous amount of, I'll say, attachment. Really just a tremendous amount of resistance to any other idea. It's like they're gripping tightly, clenching the idea that cholesterol could kill someone or is dangerous or whatever. So you could say they've been brainwashed about cholesterol. They're not saying, I believe cholesterol is dangerous. They're saying, no, it is dangerous, and I am offended or insulted by the idea of conducting scientific tests about this scientific fact. They call it a scientific fact, which allows them to dismiss science, scientific inquiry. At least that's the logical process that's going on for them. And there's a background of terror and hysteria for those individuals, social anxiety, or they wouldn't be dismissing scientific inquiry. Scientific inquiry is not that unusual of a thing. I claim that scientific inquiry is like a natural thing. A toddler, an infant, anyone, they would normally inquire and learn and study and develop hypotheses and learning and comprehension. However, in a brainwashing or indoctrination ritual, that's not part of the process. So you do get people who are socially anxious about getting the rewards of the instructor and the authority and fitting in. They want to be, conforming to the herd mentality or to the popular mainstream familiar ideas. They don't want to be targeted as a heretic or as a misfit, a fool. So they may insist hysterically, emotionally, passionately that cholesterol is dangerous. It must be dangerous. It should be dangerous. It is dangerous. Not, I believe that it is dangerous. I think it's dangerous. I was told it's dangerous. All those things are true. They do believe it. They were told it. But their verbal statement socially to other people may be, it is dangerous. And they may be argumentative about it and have animosity and defensiveness and, rage, insult, grief. What do you mean it's not? What do you mean there was a test and they have all sorts of emotions that were suppressed through the classroom rituals. And those emotions are still there back behind the surface or under the surface, back to the iceberg analogy. All those emotions are suppressed and latent. They're back there waiting to emerge, waiting to come to the surface. But the idea of scientific inquiry is insulting to someone who has been indoctrinated or brainwashed to think of themselves as a scientific expert because they memorized some unexamined ideas and then repeated them on a test and got rewarded for it and said you got an A in science because you're so good at science, you're so smart. Well, that's one way to look at it. That's one way to label it. So if 10 years later someone asks the students whether it is true or false that cholesterol can kill someone, then the ones who are most ignorant of science may insist that the correct answer is true. The ones that are most brainwashed or indoctrinated about science may insist that it is true that cholesterol can kill someone. Is it true? That's a different issue. Is there any scientific inquiry into the, accuracy or precision of the statement, cholesterol can kill someone? There either is or there isn't. So the students who are insisting that the correct answer is true, or even who are just reflexively, maybe not insisting, maybe they're more mild and calm about it, like, it's true that cholesterol can kill someone. Yeah, that's true. I read it in a headline. I have a book titled Cholesterol Can Kill Someone. That's the title of the book. I wrote a report in 4th grade called Cholesterol Can Kill Someone. It was based on it was a book report because I'd read the book, Cholesterol Can Kill Someone. I took a class about, in medical school called The Dangers of Cholesterol. So it must be true. They are operating, the ones who are, reflexively making assertions of fact, making claims. So they're making scientific claims. Cholesterol can kill someone. That's a scientific claim. But they're making it with this. They're not making it based on research, based on scientific inquiry and the scientific method in general, not their own examination of that idea. So they're operating like they're still in a science class, whether that was in graduate school or elementary school. They're operating like they're in the typical science class, and they're taking a true or false quiz. Is it true or false that cholesterol can kill someone? True! It's not like, well, let's look at the actual details and let's look closely at the specifics of the situation. Has cholesterol ever killed someone? Do we have any evidence that cholesterol specifically is what killed someone? Or did it contribute to someone's death? Was it, a mitigating factor, a risk factor in someone dying? And we could examine those things. We could, in other words, we could take the idea that it's either true or false that cholesterol can kill someone, or we can get into something more specific. Can eating in dietary consumption of cholesterol of a certain type and amount and frequency, can that kill this specific person? That's a different kind of question. It sets up scientific inquiry because it's more specific. It's more of a scientific, you could even say it's a more scientific claim than the claim that cholesterol can kill someone, or it's possible for cholesterol to kill someone. That's not a very precise claim, so it's not very precisely scientific. How do you measure that? Is it measurable? Is it something that we can invalidate through experimentation? Is it, I forget the term for that, but can we disprove it? Is the basic idea. Is it a kind of claim? Like, for instance, if I say cholesterol cannot kill someone, well, can you really disprove that it can't kill someone? It's not as scientific of a claim. So anyway, there's just ways of using language that would be called making a scientific claim, and ways of using language that probably wouldn't be called by most people the making of a scientific claim. So if a student is asked why they're answering with the response of true in regard to whether cholesterol can kill someone, they're totally conscious of the fact that they've been programmed with a doctrine. They know that they learned that idea in school. They don't think they got it from somewhere else other than school, or the media or whatever. They know that it was socially transmitted. They didn't discover it and conclude it on their own based on observation. They learned it and were encouraged and rewarded for repeating that idea. They were pressured into learning that idea and repeating it and believing it. In other words, they were brainwashed. So if the student is asked why they're answering with the response of true, they're totally conscious of the fact that they've been programmed with a doctrine that they have probably never examined closely. They may not use the specific words that I just used to describe their personal history in terms of being programmed with a doctrine or indoctrinated with a dogma. They're probably not going to use that terminology, but they know that somebody else told them something and they accepted the statement that someone else made, whether they read it or heard it or whatever. They may have even had to write it on the board 100 times. Cholesterol is a poisonous substance. Cholesterol can kill someone. So they write it, it becomes their mantra, their trance, it's embedded as an affirmation because they say it so many times, and then they operate as if it's true. But they didn't examine it necessarily. Or maybe they did examine it, but that's a separate issue. So they may not use the specific words that they've been programmed or brainwashed about the dangers of cholesterol, but they also know that they've not personally conducted any research to study why billions of livers on the planet manufacture cholesterol. Do billions of livers manufacture cholesterol in order to commit suicide as far as, is the liver like a demon or a parasite that's attacking the rest of the organism and killing it with this poison of cholesterol? Well, I think anybody who studied that or even heard that idea would probably dismiss it or discard it as complete nonsense. No, livers aren't attacking the organism with cholesterol. So people are conscious that they've never personally formed their own hypothesis about cholesterol and then tested rigorously and scientifically that hypothesis. They just memorized an idea that was presented to them in a curriculum and then blindly repeated it without examining it. And they know that. They never conducted any experiments on the effects of poisoning the liver with statin medications in order to interfere with the liver's production of cholesterol. They probably, if they're familiar with the terminology of statins or statin medications, they probably don't, most people haven't been trained or programmed to say statins poison the liver. They've been trained to think more along the lines of cholesterol's poison the organism. Again, people don't usually use the word poison. I've never heard it, actually. I make fun of these brainwashed scientific dogmas by saying that, something more extreme as an exaggeration, that cholesterol is poison in the organism, but they don't. But do statin medications poison the liver? That's actually a more reasonable use of the word poison or poisons. So we could, somebody could explore that. In fact, it's possible that I've read research on that very subject, but my interest here isn't to specifically talk about cholesterol. It's just it's one of my favorite examples to give about brainwashing and indoctrination of doctrines about science, and then calling that science. But it's really ideas about science. It's not science. It's programming people about science. You could even say it's a war on science. I like to use some kind of provocative terms like that. So the war on science programs or brainwashes people about science and, distracts them from actually practicing scientific inquiry, practicing the scientific method. No, they just are indoctrinated about scientific facts. So they're conscious that they never conducted any experiments. They didn't, control in clinical trials or in rats or in humans, and did nothing to test different amounts of cholesterol, different amounts of statin and how that affects the liver. They never conducted those tests and those trials. They never personally did it. Did they read someone else's report about some research? Probably not. How many science instructors read a report about, read the research report about cholesterol? Probably not that many science instructors. They just see in the curriculum, science is correct. Cholesterol is poisonous. Okay, let me teach that. Boom, 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 boom. There's no science involved. or there's no science involved. There's no scientific process, no scientific inquiry for the instructor, for the student, at least in many cases. So I personally have never conducted any experiments about the consumption of cholesterol, dietary consumption of cholesterol. I know that I haven't done any experiments on that. I know that I haven't done any research on the manufacturing of cholesterol by the liver of myself or any other organism. Most of us know. Whether or not, we do know generally whether or not if we have done extensive research on cholesterol, we know it. I think that's the best way to put it. Most people know they haven't done extensive research on cholesterol. They haven't analyzed any research. They haven't criticized any research. They haven't read any research, they haven't conducted any research, or maybe they read just a little, but usually that would be absolutely the most. They read a paragraph or, a 1 page of a research report. They never tested it, they never verified it, they never criticized it, they never read criticisms of it. There might be lots of criticisms of it, but they never read those because they weren't assigned to read those things. So this gets back to the issue of brainwashing and indoctrination. So it's all about assignments, and this pre-existing curriculum was then presented to all these people, and they are assigned what ideas to memorize, what ideas to focus on, to value, to blindly repeat, and so on. So they are assigned with the task of blind repetition, or conformity. They're not assigned with extensive scientific inquiry. There are classrooms where there is science conducted in those classrooms, but the vast majority of indoctrination rituals involving science aren't involving any experiments or verifications. So the person who's been trained and programmed, they may refer to their doctrines as science or as scientific, like scientific facts. They may happen to have a medical license because they took lots of initiations and into the secret societies and so on. The BAs and the MDs and the MAs and the MS and the PhD and all these different, I guess calling them secret societies is silly, but they've been indoctrinated through all these levels of the hierarchy, the high school diploma and all these different levels, the AA degree, whatever it was for them. So at some point, somebody may say, okay, I have a medical degree, I have a medical license, and then I'm going to give instructions to other people based on some statement that if I had that license, I might refer to it as science. I'm giving you proven, instructions based on scientific proof, based on scientific validity, based on scientific methods, based on scientific inquiry. That's what they might say, and they may sincerely believe that. However, they're instructed and programmed as to what to prescribe. So somebody else decides, okay, here's how you determine what to prescribe to everybody else. You don't conduct research and experiments and come to your own conclusions. We're going to tell you how to determine which pharmaceutical medications to prescribe. Follow our instructions, prescribe those medications, and then there's some fine tuning that we will allow without revoking your medical license. But if you don't use our formulas, we're going to revoke your license. You could say it's a cult. It's a hierarchical structure. It is not. There's no independence. These licensed physicians, they're not independent researchers. They are licensed agents of the state. If they're the agent of the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or whatever, state of Georgia, wherever they're operating or whatever system of government they're an agent of, well, they're going to follow the guidelines that are popular within that place, within that regime, within that jurisdiction, within that governing system. So, do the rules change from 1920 to 2011 in Georgia? Probably. Why? Well, technology changed, all sorts of things changed. But the point is, these doctrines or protocols, in particular the protocols of here's how we assess what medications to give, and here's the medications that we prescribe based on these formulas. Well, those formulas change over time. So there are rituals. So the protocols of here's how we assess the patient, and here's how we instruct or prescribe to the patient to respond, those are rituals. So that the physicians and nurses and so on are initiated into these rituals. They are trained to conduct the rituals, look for this, respond this programmed way, and then you'll send them on to the pharmacist, who is also part of the larger system, or the larger, the sequence of rituals. There's all these different rituals. So the person with the pharmacy degree or the medical license, or the person who's training the students in third grade that eventually are going to become MDs, all of these people are conscious of the fact that the source of their presumptions and statements about cholesterol, for instance, are entirely based on rituals of memorization and unexamined repetition. Their personal activity of saying cholesterol is poisonous came from somebody else. They were assigned that slogan or that doctrine to memorize and repeat, and then to act on in the case of medical doctors. They were influenced, they were programmed, they were indoctrinated, they were initiated. They did not, on their own, independently do a bunch of research and then reach some conclusion that happens to be shared by lots of other people, or some other people. That wasn't how it happened. They know that. They're conscious that they were programmed. We wouldn't say they were conscious that they were brainwashed. People don't say it that way. But they were conscious that they were indoctrinated, programmed, propagandized. They know that they didn't personally conduct scientific inquiry and reach independent conclusions. They know that they're not acting independently. They're acting based on a social assignment. And they know that. They're acting based on social pressure, social conditioning. And they know that. They're conscious of that. They don't deny it. They're aware of it. It doesn't mean that they conduct any scientific inquiry. They're just not that interested in scientific inquiry. They call their process and their rituals scientific, but they may have no real interest in science. Their interest is in the compliance and participation of other people. So to call it scientific, to call some process or protocol or ritual scientific, can be great from a marketing perspective. But they know that they didn't independently research these issues. They know there's a licensing board guiding their activities, and they have to conform to the licensing board's rules. And if they don't do what the licensing board tells them they must do, they'll get sued and they'll get disbarred or whatever. They'll have their license revoked. If they do things that are far enough, even if they do everything the licensing board says, and then they also say something like, cholesterol is healthy, then they get in trouble with the FDA or the state licensing board or whatever. They get fired from their job as a college professor if they say the heretical statement. And not that saying that cholesterol contributes to health necessarily will result in getting fired from any particular job, or maybe it did a few decades ago in a few cases, but there is an overall context of science. It's just that within the state licensing board's process, they're not specifically making assessments about science. Their job isn't to make assessments about science. Somebody somewhere makes up guidelines, and then all of these state licensing boards throughout the 50 states of the U.S. and the territories like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, all over these different locations, there's the same set of curriculum, same set of standards are being used by the licensing boards. The licensing boards aren't researchers. And they know they're not researchers. Or in the case that members of a licensing board are not researchers, they're aware, they're conscious that they're not researchers. They're just applying the standards that somebody else constructed and then delivered to them and said, you as Supreme Court justices or as trustee of the state of North Carolina's medical licensing board, here's the standards which it's your assignment to implement or to impose. So there's this whole network of assignments. There's this whole hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, No one is independent. It's not about independence. It's not about independent inquiry. It's not about scientific inquiry. It's about assigned protocols and rituals. So people know whether or not they've conducted experiments to verify or disprove their doctrines or presumptions. They may, if they've conducted research, they may know that there are criticisms of their research. Or they may not know. They may say, I don't know. Are there criticisms? I haven't read any. Or they may say, I read one and I dismissed it, so now I don't have to read any criticism of my research because I read one that I didn't like. So I dismissed it. I discarded it. That's all possible. That's all kind of normal, really. Or at least understandable that would happen occasionally. So why would some MDs say that they're prescribing of medications, and their whole statements that they make to their patients about cholesterol? Why would they say it's unconscious? It's not unconscious. They know that they're presumptive. They didn't consciously form the presumption independently, but they know that what they're saying is presumptive. They acknowledge that. They may, in fact, defend it by saying not only is it presumptive, but my presumptions are based on the authority of the medical board and of the textbook and of the, all these different committees and all these different authorities, and they will defend their presumption. They know it's presumption, though. They will defend their assigned protocol. They know they didn't develop the protocol. They know they were given that protocol and tested on whether they used that protocol. They know that. They don't deny it. It's not unconscious. Why would any of these things, convictions, identities, personas, why would they be called unconscious? It's merely a statement when the MD calls cholesterol poisonous. That is just a statement. That is just a claim. They're stringing together a construction in language, a set of words. Cholesterol is dangerous. Cholesterol is poisonous. Cholesterol is safe. Cholesterol is unsafe. Those are just sequences of words. It's not unconscious. I know that I formed those words. I might not be conscious of how I made the sound O with my lips and my chest and everything. That might be unconscious. Or that might be, that might be unconscious. How I did it. But that I did it, no, I know I made the sound O. I'm conscious that I made a statement that cholesterol is dangerous, or that cholesterol might be dangerous, or whatever statement I made. I'm conscious of my statements. An MD saying that, a news broadcaster saying that, if we say, I want to measure exactly how dangerous cholesterol is, well, I know that that's presuming that it must be dangerous, or it might be dangerous. So we're going to measure exactly how dangerous it is. And we know that that's presumptive. It involves that presumption. We're conscious of the presumption that we're conscious of the fact that it is a presumption that cholesterol is dangerous. We may not question that presumption consciously, but we're conscious of the fact that we are presuming cholesterol is dangerous. Of course we're presuming that. Or of course we're claiming that, or acting based on that creed or dogma. So while those who are hypnotized in a trance of linguistic programs will not likely ask whether or not the association between cholesterol and various medical conditions are a correlation or not, it's still conscious. Okay. So consider that there's this issue of whether cholesterol and heart disease is a correlation or a causal relationship, where cholesterol caused the heart disease, or did the heart disease cause certain the presence of cholesterol to concentrate in certain areas, or were they both the effect of some other cause, where they're correlated in that way, where they both tend to happen at the same time because of some third element, some third variable. So people who are hypnotized in a trance of linguistic programs about cholesterol being poisonous, well, they're not going to ask, is it just a correlation? They've never consciously practiced scientific inquiry in regard to cholesterol. They don't have any science in their claims and statements about cholesterol. They're just repeating protocols that they have been indoctrinated or brainwashed to repeat. They're conscious in general, they're just not conscious of certain questions. They've never formulated certain questions. They're not in the business of formulating scientific questions and then inquiring scientifically and practicing a method. They're technicians, they're pharmacists, they're MDs, they're nurses. They're not researchers. They're agents of the state or agents of the government. They're licensed. They're ministers of the state. They're administering the medications that the state has prescribed for them to prescribe to others. They are ministers of the state. They are the priests. They may be unconscious of the issue of whether cholesterol is correlated to various medical conditions or a cause of various medical conditions, or whether those medical conditions cause or tend to cause the manufacture of certain kinds of cholesterol or the concentration of certain kinds of cholesterol in a particular part of the bloodstream or wherever it may be, a particular area of the body. They're conscious in general, they're just only conscious of the things they're conscious of. So they just happen to be focusing on something other than what I might call science. They're just conducting rituals. They're just learning protocols and implementing protocols blindly or without examining the protocols. They're operating from presumptive hysteria, at least in some cases, about a demon called cholesterol that they worship as a foreign invader that possesses an organism and then attacks it and in some cases kills it. So they might not label cholesterol a demon, they may not label their activities as demon worship or hysteria, but to me, they're hysterical or unconscious, right? So they would even resist as insulting some of the terminology that I use. They would call it heresy or whatever they would call it. Quackery, right? Their doctrines are science, and then scientific inquiry about their doctrines they might dismiss as pseudoscience or quackery. Maybe a bit ironic, but anyway. So how is cholesterol a foreign invader? Well, it's just not. Livers manufacture it. So I'm definitely, playing around here with language. I'm making fun of so-called science, mainstream science. It's not very scientific is the basic point. And there's a lot of demon worship in medical science. What I call demon worship is very common in medical science. Cancer is some living entity that invades an organism and possesses it and kills it, according to how most what I understand as far as how most MDs would talk or how most graduates of science curriculums would talk. That's demon worship. When I was a student in those science classrooms, that's how I taught. Cancer is a living thing. It possesses an entity, or it possesses an organism, and then that foreign entity attacks and spreads and kills the organism. That's how I thought of cancer. Whether that's accurate or not is a different issue. Maybe it is accurate. Maybe cancer is parasitic and a living entity. That's a different issue. My point is that I memorized these ideas and repeated them and never questioned them. So we could say I have presumptions and I've never consciously examined the presumptions, but I would recognize them as presumptive. I know that I learned or was assigned this idea of cancer as a demon that possesses organisms and kills them. And then I worshipped that model of reality or that diagnostic label. Cancer. I worshipped cancer hysterically. Oh my God, it's frightening. It's horrible. Is it? Maybe it's actually very simple to produce cancer or stop producing cancer. Because cancer is just an effect. Cancer is not a cause. So are people conscious in regard to the activity of their liver? What their liver is doing? When their liver is manufacturing different amounts of cholesterol or maybe different kinds of cholesterol, are people conscious about that? No, they don't consciously order the liver to increase or slow down production and all that, or stop production or start. They don't. They're not conscious in terms of their intentions about their liver producing cholesterol. I talk to people about their pancreas producing baking soda, and people will say, baking soda? My pancreas doesn't create baking soda. I would have learned about it in science class. Either your pancreas does produce baking soda or it does not. Whether you learned about it in class, any class, is a different issue. So are people conscious in regard to the activity of their pancreas, their liver, and so on? No. They don't know if their pancreas is manufacturing cholesterol, or is it the liver that manufactures cholesterol? Did I just make that up? Did I just try to deceive you? Well, maybe it's the spleen. Maybe it's your brain. What organ do you have? Oh, do you have an appendix? Do you have an ovary? Maybe it's I think it's my ovary that manufactures cholesterol. And then my ovary will convert the cholesterol into estrogen or bile or vitamin D or all these different things. So if I don't intend to construct cholesterol and then to convert it into all these other things, then I'm not conscious of it. So we don't intentionally influence the liver's functions, generally speaking, unless we're taking statin medications to poison the liver and stop it from manufacturing so much cholesterol. In that case, we might be intentionally influencing the liver's function. But in general, we're not trying to prevent cholesterol from being made or from being converted from cholesterol into all the various other essential nutrients and hormones that are only made from cholesterol. So we're conscious, though, of the words that we use. We might not be conscious about all the presumptions behind those words. Like if I say we want to measure exactly how dangerous cholesterol is, well, then I'm presuming, obviously, that cholesterol is dangerous. So I might not be conscious of all the logical presumptions and premises, but I am conscious in general. I'm conscious about my language that I'm using. We're conscious if we're labeling statin as a medicine or labeling statin as a poison. I know I am labeling, through what I've been trained to do, probably, labeling statin as a medicine or statin as a poison. And I'm labeling cholesterol as a poison or cholesterol as an essential nutrient or whatever labels I give to it in language. I know that I'm using labels in language, and I'm using a bunch of them. Cholesterol, statin, poison, organ, compound, chemical, demon, woo. So we may not examine various possible ways of using language. Like we may not examine even our own use of language, but we're conscious of it. And we may not examine the logic behind our own habitual doctrines, our most familiar dogmas. We might not examine the logic and the premises behind them and the presumptions. We might not. There's all these presuppositions or things that I presume and don't question. We might examine those, and if we do, we have to do it one by one. And we might not examine those. In brainwashing rituals, it's not part of the assignment to examine the doctrines. Or not to honestly and independently examine the doctrines, because it's a social ritual. What's independent about the social ritual? It's programming. It's brainwashing. It's the whole protocol of public schools and lots of other schools, or private universities and so on. It developed out of the Roman Catholic Church. The Sacred Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith, or Propaganda de Fide. Those rituals for training instructors, for training missionaries to go out and indoctrinate and brainwash and publicize doctrines and dogmas, those training rituals are the foundations from which monasteries were made and from which colleges and universities and elementary schools, it's all about the creation of a curriculum and then the presenting of those ideas and that sequence to the targets, the targeted population, the priests in training or the soldiers in training or the secretaries in training or whatever it is, the slaves in training. All of those ideas are constructed, they're put together, they're presented to whatever groups, and it's all just a ritual of rewarding conformity. That's the really, really important thing, is rewarding conformity. So the scientific merit of an idea about cholesterol or statin or whatever, that's not the focus of this presentation. As you may have noticed, I really haven't conducted any research here. I haven't displayed the research to you and reported on it. And I haven't encouraged you to conduct research. I have brought attention to language and the hypnotic effects of assigning and programming ideas. Whenever I make a statement or claim and share it socially with somebody, there's the potential for there to be unexamined presumptions in my statement. And when you make a statement to somebody or you interact with somebody, there can be presumptions that are not examined. I'm just raising the subject of the possibility of examining presumptions. It is possible to do. It's also possible to do other things besides examine presumptions. We could just blindly repeat, memorize and then blindly repeat slogans and doctrines and so on. There's lots of options. We could also form curriculums to then propagandize other people and program and brainwash other people in particular ways. Those are all options. Those are all things that actually happen and that people do. Some people do them very consciously, some people less consciously, some people not very consciously at all. But it's not unconscious and conscious, like just two categories. There's this whole spectrum of alertness, awareness, attention, comprehension, consciousness, if you will, alertness. I already said alertness. Habit or examination, attentiveness or inattentiveness, neglect or care and precision and rigor and focus. Being awake versus being asleep or spiritually dead or something like that. So we may examine various possible ways of using language, we may not. We may examine the logic behind our own habitual doctrines, we may not. Again, it's one by one that we would examine them. So what doctrine is important to examine? We could examine how we use language. We could develop a more conscious usage of language. Some people do, and some people do not. And there are social pressures to discourage the attentive use of language. There also could be social pressures to encourage the attentive use of language. But in general, the intensive use of language might be quite discouraged. Even being attentive to the use of language in general might be quite discouraged. That's not part of the curriculum. That's not part of the programming ritual. That's not part of the indoctrination program. Unless it is. So I'd like everybody to repeat after me. Cholesterol is not cholesterol. Now, I'm going to test you on that later. And you need to say true. So I'm going to say, is cholesterol cholesterol or is cholesterol not cholesterol? And you need to say true in order for me to give you the degree and the diploma and the certificate and the license, or else we're going to revoke it and you're not going to get any drugs from our drug pushers. And if you don't have any drugs from our drug pushers, how are you going to sell them to your addicts? Come on. We need you to answer cholesterol is not cholesterol when we test it. Okay? Because it's like George Foreman. He was the author of the book 1984. He's also a boxer. George Foreman, he made a grill too, I think. Or was that George Orwell? Anyway, so George Foreman said, the reason his name is Foreman, by the way, is because he said 2 plus 2 is 4. And George Orwell said, no, 2 plus 2 is 5. And they got into a boxing match about it. And, of course, George Foreman lost. Because, why did he lose, you might ask? Because he was paid off by the FDA. And they were like, dude, if you don't lose this match, we're going to assassinate you and your whole family. So, I know that's a different issue. But 2 plus 2 is not cholesterol, okay? And I want that to be very clear, and that you're clear that it's very true. Good.